Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. Welcome to another episode. A year ago, I was fortunate enough to have Jeremy Reisman from Pride of Detroit as a guest on the show. We talked about the evolution of the Detroit Lions franchise in two different parts last summer. In this episode, we're going to talk about some of the bigger topics that have been circulating over the past year as we talk about the state of the franchise and what the future just might look like for these Detroit Lions. That and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is David Montgomery, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is Jeremy Reisman from SB Nation. Jeremy covers the Lions extensively, running Pride of Detroit since 2015. He's been fully credentialed by the Lions since 2018, and he is the producer of their POD cast. Jeremy, welcome, and thanks for taking time to join the show again to talk Detroit Lions football.
Of course. I'll jump at any opportunity to do so.
Awesome. Is there anything I missed in your intro that listeners should know about, or anything else you'd like to tell us?
I mean, maybe the only other thing is starting a couple of years ago, we started a new venture called the Pride of Detroit Direct, which is a premium newsletter where you kind of get exclusive videos, exclusive mailbags, some of more my content that's a little bit more personal, a little bit more from the gut than just the news kind of dry stuff, so to speak. And so if anyone's interested, maybe after this podcast, after listening to me talk, to get more of me, you go to prideofdetroit.com/subscribe.
Yes, and you should subscribe to that because you get a lot of great insights from Jeremy. I know firsthand from that.
I appreciate that.
All right, well, Jeremy, the theme of this conversation is the evolution of the franchise. We talked last summer. Lions 3-13-1 in the first year, then 9-8, 12-5, 15-2. I mean, each season under Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, and company, the team has gotten better. Those numbers kind of spell it out. There is no denying there has been an evolution. So let's just start there. You've covered this team consistently without a break for a decade. What has changed with this franchise? And there's a couple words that come to mind for me, but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really a top-down teardown, right? You have to give a fair amount of credit to Sheila Hamp, obviously, who took over really just before Matt Patricia's exit here in Detroit. And, the way she ran the coaching search, the GM search the next year was different from other times, partially because it didn't seem, I would actually say mostly because they weren't seeking a different franchise to model themselves after. They knew what was true to them, what they were seeking. They were kind of trusting, and in Sheila's case, trusting her years of really entrepreneurship beyond, just the Ford family and the Ford Motor Company. She had reinvigorated a theater. And so I think she kind of knew what it took to kind of like breathe life into something. And so she kind of went by her instincts of what she thought this franchise needed to value, and that seems to have been transparency, no egos in the room, things of that nature. And really, you can see how that has taken effect from the top down. Now, obviously, in order to have a successful football team, you need guys who are really good talent evaluators, and you need actually good players and things like that, and good coaches, which have all come along in these past 4 or 5 years here. But really, I think it all starts with the organizational kind of top-down approach of let's get these people in the building that don't have egos, that can listen to each other and work collaboratively in a way that isn't going to seem insulting to one or the other. And more importantly, keep each other dependable, keep each other, basically understand that, everyone here has a role. You have to trust your fellow employees to do that role, and also give them enough space to do that role, which is something that you don't really see with every owner. Some owners feel the need to meddle. Sheila has enough of a finger on the pulse where she's not meddling, but she's also not, a distant owner like I think some Lions franchises of the past, you could say, of.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the first time the Lions have had a talented team. I mean, the 2014 team was very talented, and they've had moments of peaking, just, kind of look like they're on the right roll, and then everything just kind of falls back apart. And so Sheila put the people in place, and you hit the nail on the head there. And they've obviously got the talent, but the continuity of coaching staff and I guess the drafting of the general manager, Brad Holmes, also come into a big play.
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's something that obviously they'll have to deal with a little bit of adversity this year, but I think they viewed themselves as extremely lucky that Aaron Glenn was kind of a hidden talent, and Ben Johnson was an up and comer that, wanted to give it one more go around in 2024. But yeah, I mean, you also have to look at the way Dan Campbell has managed his coaching staff. He's given enough leash to the people he's trusted, but also he's shown a little bit of like, hey, if you aren't getting it, if you aren't aligned with what I see, like, we're going to move on from you. There are a handful of coaches here that lasted a year, maybe 2 years here in Detroit, and Dan Campbell, saw that it wasn't working. And so I think he deserves a ton of credit for knowing which coaches have it, and you just need to give them a little bit more time, and knowing which coaches to maybe say, you know what? You're a good coach, but you're not the right fit here. And that's not something that a lot of coaches, I think, have. I mean, you look back at some of these other teams like Jim Caldwell, a very, very, very good coach, but sometimes a little bit too trusting of coaches that maybe didn't deserve it, held on to them a little bit too long. You see some other coaches that say, throw their guys under the bus, right? If the defense isn't working, maybe Aaron Glenn would have been gone in year 2 under different head coaches. And so, again, it takes someone with the finger on the pulse of understanding who everyone on that team is, what's working, even if it might not be showing up on game day, and then managing the roster and the coaching roster the way that he sees fit, in a way that really, I mean, it's kind of hard to argue with what Dan Campbell has done with pretty much everyone on the coaching staff, right? Maybe the hires he's made here and there haven't worked, but when they haven't, he hasn't wasted time in making sure that they are getting the right guy in the building.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anybody that is 100% perfect on every hiring that they do and all those decisions. But you keep coming back to that finger on the pulse. And, Dan Campbell as the head coach, you talk about that transparency between him and Brad and the rest of the team. Yeah. It seems that they get the buy-in from the players, right? And so that's, if anyone's worked in any organization, when you have a good leader, you get more out of the employees by natural habit, not by anything that's forced. You don't have to do external things to motivate them. They're already motivated. And so seeing that happen, and now we have a reverse effect happening where instead of overpaying people to come to Detroit, people will take less to come to Detroit.
It's amazing how that works, right? Yeah, and I think if you were looking really closely in those first couple of years when the success wasn't coming, you could tell that not only was the message being received by the players, but they were getting the right kind of players in the building, right? It never felt like when they started, 3-13-1, and when they started 1-7 the next year, there was never a sense that the locker room had been lost. And some fans may have been jumping board, and I wouldn't even blame them. I probably lost my cool once or twice during that 2022 season. But it was never lost in the locker room, which shows to me, one, that Dan Campbell is really freaking good at getting the message through and leading a team through adversity. But two, Brad Holmes also did a really good job of getting the players in the building that will play through a lost season, will play through a game in which they're getting blown out through the first 2 quarters and try to fight their way back in the second half. And so it was critical to have a building like that because, we see time and time again, and the Lions are probably guilty of this too, of being impatient during a rebuild, being impatient when it comes to your players, your coaches, all that sort of stuff. And the Lions, their players, all understood what was happening and all understood how close they were early in that 2022 season, and it paid off in the back of that 2022 season. And really, we haven't seen the train slow down since. And it's honestly pretty miraculous to see just how you can take those incremental steps every single year, like you laid out there, and really not take a step back. Now, obviously, they took a step back when you talk to postseason and all that sort of stuff, but when it's a single elimination playoffs, it's hard to continue to rise and rise and rise after you've gotten to the NFC Championship game.
Right. There's only one more level to go to.
Right.
So let's hit on that loss to
Yeah.
Washington. That hurt. Now, obviously for a lot of reasons and a lot of different angles. But what was your analysis on that loss? And second part is, did that loss hurt more or less, or just different than the NFC Championship game the year before?
I'll start with that one first because to me, the lines never really looked completely in that Washington game. I know it was close for a lot of it, and they even had the lead early on, but it just felt like Washington had their number offensively, and it didn't look like the Lions had any way of stopping Jane Daniels or anything like that. So it was just a matter of like the offense cannot take a step back. Like the offense cannot make a single mistake in this game, or Washington's going to win. They turned the ball over 4 times. That's plenty of mistakes. And so to me, like I was prepared in the second quarter of like, oh, I don't think they're going to win this game. So in that essence, I don't think it hurt as much
Okay.
because when I'm in San Francisco at that game in the press box looking at flights to Las Vegas at halftime, because I have to, like that you know the superstitious guy in me was like, I would never do anything like that, but if I buy the tickets at halftime, they're not going to be as expensive after the game when they know the Lions have won. So
Right.
having that rug pulled out from underneath me, and I understand like they weren't supposed to be where they were. No one really expected them to be in the Super Bowl. It was just a season where it's like, hey, win a playoff game and we're happy. Um, so in that sense, like I get why maybe some people would say last year where the expectations were higher, it was more painful. But for me, getting that close in what was just like, I don't know, it felt like a drug trip season, especially when it came to the playoffs, where it's just like we're really beating Matthew Stafford, we're going to the NFC Championship game, we're getting like all the breaks when it comes to how the playoff schedules is breaking, and then you just put it on San Francisco in that first half.
Yeah.
I'm just like, let me enjoy this ride until it ends, and for it to end so dramatically and abruptly in a game that they should have won. Like, I don't think they should have beaten Washington. I think they should have beaten San Francisco that night, and I think that's why it hurts a little bit more.
Yeah, I too was at both of those games, and at the end of the second quarter, I'm texting my wife like, "We might have to talk. We might have to have a conversation here."
Right.
And but that NFC Championship game year, the Lions were a team on fire, right? They
Yeah.
were a team nobody wanted to touch, and the way they were playing that first half, I agree. They should have beaten the San Francisco 49ers that game. The Washington game, I feel like we were almost given fool's gold 2 weeks earlier, the
Yeah.
way they manhandled the Minnesota Vikings. It was like,
No doubt.
wait a minute, all these injuries, despite them, we just destroyed the Vikings, who were 14-2. And it's
Yeah.
like, wait a minute. So it got you thinking, like, wait a minute, maybe we can do this despite all that. And you saw that, Washington had to play a perfect game against Tampa, or Tampa had to play a perfect game against Washington, and Tampa didn't, so Washington won.
Right.
And like you said, the Lions, it felt off by the middle of the second quarter. You're like,
Yep.
this isn't feeling good. I'm not optimistic because, and then, the injury to Amik Robertson, and you're just
Right.
like, the defense cannot hold this. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I look at him as just being different. Being the number one seed and getting upset at home, big disappointment. But again, I think that fool's gold is what I call it from that Vikings. The win over the Vikings set us up for that, and so yeah, it didn't happen. So that analysis is probably just mounting of injuries, and the offense couldn't make a mistake, and they made about 4 too many.
Yeah, I mean, it essentially goes down to that. I don't want to be overly simplistic, and don't
Right.
want to just blame injuries because there were mistakes made. The offense wasn't itself in that game. You could certainly point to some questionable play calls. I know that has become a very popular excuse now that Ben Johnson's out of town. And there's at least a little bit of validity to that. I think maybe that is also being overplayed a little bit. But the offensive line wasn't playing its best. Jared Goff certainly wasn't at his best, and so. You sometimes, and this is why I'm maybe a little bit more forgiving about last season than other people is, but just sometimes it's not your day. And when you have the cruelty of single elimination playoffs, if you just happen to have your bad day on the wrong day, your season's over. That's
Yeah.
why I don't think the best team wins the Super Bowl every year. In fact, I rarely think it happens. One of the things I did after the season was just kind of track how one seeds did in the playoffs over the past 15 years, and you'd be surprised about how terrible they have been. How many times one seeds have done exactly what the Lions have done, which is one and done, which is, I mean, you hear it all the time. You got to get that one seed. You want the bye week. You want fewer games to get to the Super Bowl. And I agree with all that, but and I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe there is a little bit of truth of like, hey, maybe you don't want to buy when things are rolling right into the playoffs. Maybe you don't want that extra break. Certainly, it made sense for the Lions at the time, considering how injured they were.
Yeah.
But maybe there's at least a little bit of validity to coming into the playoffs a little bit cold. And so by that essence, I guess I don't view last year as a completely failed season. I mean, they set so many franchise records. They took so many steps. It stinks that it happened in the last year of your offensive coordinator, and your last year of your defensive coordinator, and last year of your starting, Pro Bowl center. But that's the cruelty of the NFL, man. It is not easy, no matter how many, no matter how much, Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady make it look. It is not easy to even get to the Super Bowl. And so, the Lions are going to have to go back to the drawing board a little bit. Maybe they take a little bit of a step back in terms of, their personnel and their coaching staff, but it's easy to forget just how stacked the roster continues to be. And, I don't look at that 15-2 season as something that was lucky or fluky, or they weren't actually as good as their record because they lost in the playoffs. I think you look at each individual game and, I can probably only point to one or two where it's like, oh, they actually got lucky that game. And I think the only one that really comes to mind is the Houston one, right?
Yeah, that comes to mind right away. And maybe the Chicago Bears game at the end there.
Sure.
But,
True.
but all right, well, hey, it's year 3 going to year 3 going to year 4. The Lions went 12-5, 15-2. But as we kind of talked about, there were very few changes, right?
Yeah.
Now, going from year 4 to year 5, there's going to be a lot more players and coaches.
Yep.
So let's start with the coaching thing. They lose coordinators Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, and Dan Campbell said a total of 14 guys are either new or in new positions in the coaching staff. How much is this going to affect the team in your eyes?
It's hard to say. I mean, in a lot of ways, not much is going to change in terms of their scheme. So I think you could still say like they're in, as they like to say, 401, 501 now, I guess, this year of learning the offense, learning the defense, because, Kelvin Shepherd was basically, he even, mentioned it a couple times. He views himself as an Aaron Glenn clone. Like he'd watch opposing offense tapes from previous games and be like, all right, this is the play that I would call defensively. And sure enough, he'd roll the tape, and that's exactly what Aaron Glenn called. So I think the defense is going to look very, very similar. I think in terms of leadership, it's maybe a half step down from Aaron Glenn to Kelvin Shepherd. I think Shepherd is an incredible leader, just maybe a little bit young for it. So we'll see how he deals with adversity, how he deals with certain things that, maybe he hasn't dealt with before. But the Lions have also known that they're going to lose these two guys for a very long time. And they've started, to take steps to make sure that they had guys that they were comfortable to take over. Now, I think John Morton is the more interesting of the hire. I think a lot of people thought maybe that was going to be an internal hire, and yes, it kind of sort of was, with the fact that John Morton was here in 2022 and helped install the offense alongside Ben Johnson, because that was Ben Johnson's first year.
Yep.
But there's a little bit more uncertainty with him there because he doesn't have an extensive play calling history. He does have some. It didn't go great with the Jets a few years ago, but that was a terrible roster, so I think you can forgive that. And Dan Campbell even said, back in 2022, and some of the things he's done since then, like he'd call a play here or two there. The offensive coordinator would be like, hey, it's 3rd and 7. What play you got for me, Johnny Mo? And he'd, pitch in and give his play call. So it's not a foreign concept to him. But when you look at the things that made Ben Johnson special, a lot of times it was not just what what play you called then, but like how you set yourself up in the first quarter, and use those plays in the first quarter to set yourself up with similar looking plays in the fourth quarter to kind of throw the defense off. And that is a skill that I think is learned. I don't think that's something that you inherently have. I think it's something that you kind of get a feel of by doing it over and over and over again. And I don't think Johnny Morton's going to have that right away, right? I think there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period. And so, yeah, I think expecting some sort of like adjustment, let's get our feet settled at the beginning of the season would make sense. It's not going to be a 1-to-1 replacement really on either side of the ball. And then when you kind of dig deeper into, other positions. I really like the hires that the Lions have made, the external hires in terms of like positional coaches. I'm continually kind of astounded by the job that Dan Campbell is doing there. And it's kind of like what you were saying with free agents. Like when you're bad, no one wants to come over there. But when you're really good and your coaches are getting promotions and getting hired elsewhere, you want to come there. You want to be like, oh, look, they, not only are they letting, these guys take promotions, but they're clearly building coaching staffs with growth in mind. There is a chain of command that leads to promotions and learning more and being surrounded by good coaches. And one of the things this offseason that I took as something that really kind of highlights what the Lions are doing now is the story that Brad Holmes told a couple months ago to Field Yates, where he actually had an option to either join the Lions or the Rams, and he chose the Rams because he looked at their staff, and each one of them, or almost all of them, had started as an intern and then got internally promoted. And when you see a career pathway one way and you're not so sure with the Lions, who didn't have that at the franchise back in the day, 20 whatever years ago it was, you're going to want to go to the better franchise that has a clear line of growth. And so now the Lions are there. Now the Lions are in a place where you want to come to Detroit. If you're a coach, you want to come to Detroit as a player, because as a player, you're going to get treated well. You're going to get raises and get your deals when you're due them, and you might win a championship. And if you're a coach, they're going to treat you well there. They're going to make sure that you are doing a little bit more than your job title entails, right? You're going to, okay, I know you're only on quality control, but we're going to have you, run the nickel cornerback room when you're here. And it's just like those little incremental steps of like, if you can handle that, well, guess what? When our defensive back coach becomes a defensive coordinator somewhere else, you're next in line, buddy. And that matters. And I think you got, again, like this all like relates to top down, right? That is something that Sheila, I would say, probably has a big part of. It's certainly something that Bob and Dan, or Dan and Bob, Dan and Brad have their hands on. And so
You went to the old guy.
I did. The little trauma sneaking back in, but yeah, I think it just speaks again to the organizational health of this team right now.
Yeah. Well, and like, you hit on some of the hires they made on the coaching staff. David Shaw, Tashard Choice. I mean,
Right.
David Shaw's got extensive coaching experience. Obviously there's always going to be that adjustment and there's going to be changes, but it's been talked about that, the Lions we're already going to make changes to the offense. They're not going to be stagnant the exact same way they would before. But there could actually be some built-in positives from like David Shaw joining the offensive coaching staff.
I mean, anytime you bring in a fresh voice, a fresh set of eyes, that could be viewed as a positive, right? It's not guaranteed to go well,
Right.
But yeah, I think having Johnny Morton have that David Shaw that he's known for 30 years certainly helps, right? Like, and again, it's like it's making your coaches comfortable. It's making them feel like you are catering to them in a way that is trying to get the best out of them. And so, David Shaw is certainly going to be a very good leader type in that room as well. He was one of the most well-regarded coaches ever, I think, at Stanford, and pretty smart guy too. What's interesting to me is that he looked like he was on a path to maybe be front office guy. He was kind of personnel in his last job. And when Dan Campbell came calling again, he was like, you know what? I'm not going to pass on that opportunity. I want to get back into coaching a little bit. And so, again, it speaks to, I think, Dan Campbell's ability to recruit and show people that, there's still a chance to grow your career however you want to here. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned, like, I even like Tyler Roll, a guy who seemed like he was never going to leave North Dakota because he just loves it so much there. And you can tell how hungry he is. Might not be, the most qualified guy at the position, isn't a guy that's been coaching NFL tight ends for a decade, but I think you have to kind of sprinkle in some of those like really proven guys with the new up and comers so that, those are the guys that maybe Tyler Roll's an offensive coordinator one day. Maybe he's the kind of guy that's just going to coach NFL tight ends for 30 years. You don't really know, but really good reputation. Tashard Choice is another one of those up and comers where it's with him, it was like, who is going to get the first crack at him at the NFL level? When is he going to make that jump? And I think dangling a Jahmyr Gibbs in front of him, who he has an extensive history with, was enough to get him to jump to the big show here.
All right, well, let's start nudging our way to the playing field and the players.
Sure.
Offensive line is the area where most people are going to be focused during training camp. But beyond that position battle, are there other spots that you think are going to be intriguing to watch? Now, they could be starting roles, or they might be like a top backup or two role otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that jumps out to me right away is just defensive line in general. Obviously you have your Aiden Hutchinson, but kind of like beyond that, it's like, okay, but who's actually going to play right away? Because the injury to Lee McNeil kind of looms large. He's going to miss at least the first 2 months of the season. So who jumps in there? DJ Reader's obviously going to have a pretty big role. Is Tyleek ready to be a starter week one? It'll be interesting to see because obviously I think they have a lot of faith in Tyleek Williams. They wouldn't have picked him when they did if they didn't. But is he ready to be an Aleem McNeil type? Because that sounded like something that they saw more of a down the line. Like it took a while for Aleem McNeil to be Aleem McNeil. It was more of a nose tackle, grew to be a three tech. Tyleek's not going to be a three tech out of the gate, even though he played a fair amount of three tech at Ohio State. I think they view that more as a developmental role. So who is the three tech? Who's the guy that's going to get a lot of that playing time? Are you going to play Levi on the inside? Are you going to play Pascal on the inside? There's so many of these guys that are like inside outside, and I don't know what to expect. A lot of them didn't play in the spring, so I don't know where they're going to start when training camp is there. And then obviously, there's still obviously a fair amount of drama when it comes to who's opposite Aiden Hutchinson. I think
Yeah.
Marcus Davenport is their guy. They were raving about him so much at the beginning of last year before his injuries. And so I truly think he can be their guy. It's just obviously the injury stuff. So if he can't stay healthy, who's next man up? Is it Levi? Is it Josh? Is it, again, some of these same guys that you don't know if it's inside, outside. How quickly is Ahmed Hassanin going to kind of enter that conversation? Is Zadarius Smith eventually going to re-sign and be part of that plan? I hate to be like, everyone's talking about edge all the time and it doesn't matter, but it does kind of matter and it is kind of important. And, you have Aiden Hutchinson and it's important not to forget that because not everyone has an Aiden Hutchinson, but
Right.
they do have a fair amount of questions, I think, on that defensive line to answer. And yeah, it's not just the depth there. I think you kind of wonder who's going to be the week one starters out there.
Yeah, I actually got quite lucky with Levi coming back on a 1 year deal like that
Yeah.
to help solidify that to just, avoid one more hole that adds, intrigue, mystery, and it's a big question mark.
Yeah, no question. I think that was one of my favorite signings, and obviously the market is what it is. If no one was handing Levi a $10 million deal, which is what I thought he might get, then
Yeah.
great for the Lions. You jump in there and you bring him back. But yeah, that was a bit of a surprising one to me, and so maybe you just ride this 1 year of Levi, and if he balls out again, which I thought he had a pretty good season last year, then you kind of say, well, thanks for the extra season there, bud, and enjoy your $15 million somewhere else.
Yeah, because if he wants a 1 year deal to show how good he can be, there's no better place than to stay in Detroit. And
No
so,
question.
well,
And now you got a young guy who's super motivated to have like a contract year.
oh yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's talk about Jared Goff, the quarterback, the captain. He's got a new offensive coordinator. He has at least two new offensive linemen starting in front of him. No Frank Ragnow.
Yeah.
How does this affect Jared Goff? He's evolved as a quarterback since he got here from LA. He's grown, he's learned, but it seems he still doesn't always get the respect. So how do you think this affects him?
Well, I mean, I think it means he's going to have to take on even more responsibility before the snap. That's something that I think is he's probably grown the most in his 5 years in Detroit. Just at that, it's recognizing, certain coverages. It's recognizing, where pressure packages might be coming from. But that was something that Frank Ragnow did really well too. Like that was something
Right.
that they worked in conjunction with each other. And whether it's Tate Ratledge or Graham Glasgow, they're not going to be on Frank's level because I don't know if anyone in the NFL is or was. So it'll be a little bit on Jared to make sure that he can do that for whoever the center is and kind of work again in conjunction, but like kind of take the lead maybe a little bit where maybe Frank in some situations was like the key to when it came to protection looks and things like that. Beyond that, it's avoiding the clunker games, right? They've been happening fewer and fewer, but when they happen, it sinks the entire ship, right? When he throws five interceptions against Houston. It requires an absolute miracle to come back. When you turn the ball over 4 times in the divisional round, you get bounced in the first round. And, not all those interceptions and fumbles and all those things are necessarily his fault, but he does have to take care of the ball better in critical moments. And again, that is something he has wildly, I think, improved upon. When you look back at some of those first couple of years here in Detroit and even some of the last ones in LA, he had a reputation of not being able to hold on to the ball very well. And I think he has moderate to minimal fumbles over the last year or two. So that's something he's improving on, but it's something he's going to have to be elite at. If you're going to kind of continue to be in these conversations of is he or isn't he a top 10, top 5 quarterback, which statistically he has been, you have to deliver in big moments. And a lot of times Jared has. I mean, he's won 2 playoff games here, right? He won that big showdown against Minnesota in week 18 last year. But it's what have you done for me lately? And unfortunately for Jared, turned the ball over 4 times the last playoff game. So he just, it's sounds very simple. And I know it's not, because again, you just have off days sometimes, but Jared really has to make sure those are limited to 1 or 0 this year. And when it happens, it better be in the regular season.
That makes sense. Well, I hate doing this, but I got to ask you, because you brought it up, the rankings, right? Mm-hmm. I often get asked, where's Jared Goff? Is he a top 5? Is he a top 10 quarterback? You and I talked last year, and I think we both agreed Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford are probably the 2 best quarterbacks the Lions have had in the last 50 years.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
And so where does Jared Goff rank today? PFF came out. They've got him at number 9. Yeah. And the weird thing is they've got him in a tier with Brock Purdy and Geno Smith. Yeah. And so it's kind of like you're grouping him with them. And again, that doesn't seem like the right spot to me. I definitely think he's a top 10 quarterback. Yeah. I don't get too caught up in these rankings most of the time because it doesn't really matter. It's like, Is he good enough to be your guy? And as Dan Campbell said, he is. But do you kind of have a vibe or a feel for where you think Jared Goff is on the rankings?
It's funny because I think I had the exact same reaction as you when I saw that list, because when I see 9, I'm like, okay, that's reasonable. That makes sense. And then when you see him in the tier with Brock Purdy and I'm just like, well, I think he's better than those guys. And so but I mean, maybe at the top of that tier, right? Because I do think you could name some quarterbacks, and I know we get a little excited and maybe over credit some guys that are dual threat quarterbacks and things like that, and can throw, have a cannon arm, have one of these like defining physical features. And I'm not saying Jared Goff doesn't. Like his arm is good, his accuracy is outstanding, but like he doesn't have one of those Sports Center top 10 features, right? He's not making a ton of plays with his legs. He's not dropping a ton of dimes because he doesn't, he knows when to test the defense deep, and he generally doesn't. He generally works the middle of the field and takes what the defense can get you, and that isn't sexy to people, but that is how the NFL works today. with more teams like playing too high safety looks, you have to take what's in front of you. You have to really nail the short and intermediate stuff. And that is something that Jared Goff is elite at. That is something that I would probably, rank him in the top 5, top 3 of all NFL quarterbacks in doing. And unfortunately, that doesn't excite people enough to be like, oh, you're not a good quarterback. Oh, I can throw a screen pass. I can, but it's a lot more than that. It's recognizing the guy you should go to. It's recognizing, where to throw so that you're leading guys to maximize yak and things like that. So I think he doesn't get enough credit there. I think he, like I said before, I think his pre-snap stuff is among the best in the league as well. But unfortunately, without a Super Bowl and without some of these highlight plays, it's going to be really hard to really give him that top 5 ranking. And so I think he's in that 6 to 9 range, and you can throw him wherever there, and I'm not going to get upset about it.
Yep, I'm not either. I'll say top 10. I'm not going to argue for top 5 because, like you said, the Super Bowl thing does matter. And again, it's a ranking. It doesn't really matter. All right, well, let's talk about something else that doesn't really matter, but just something I've observed, and that is the Jared Goff chant.
Sure.
Or lack thereof, right?
Yeah.
It was everywhere last summer. Haven't heard it at all this offseason. At least I haven't.
Right.
Does it come back? Is it just a Detroit Lions related thing in the future? What does it take for it to come back? Does it even? Well, I don't know if it matters, but just what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think part of the reason it hasn't needed to come back in the offseason is that the Pistons are really good. The Tigers are really good, right?
They can cheer for those teams. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I could see it maybe still happening at a Red Wings game because people are pretty cynical about the Red Wings right now. But obviously the playoff performance put a little bit of a damper on that. But if he's balling out, if he's in an MVP race, it's going to come back. I mean, they play the Rams right this year, right? It's going to come back that game. Or is that no? That's in LA. So I guess
it still could come back in that game. The way LA's home fans tend to be.
That's a good point. So yeah, I think it'll show up maybe in a game or two here. That if he has another one of those crazy games where he's like 15 of 15 in the third quarter, that could certainly happen. But I think it had its moment. And it's gone. And that doesn't mean like fans hate Jared Goff now or whatever. It's just I don't know. Sometimes little fads, I don't know, sayings, they come and go per season. The players say it all the time. The coaches say it all the time. Like every season's a new season, a different season. It's a different team. And so I think we've moved maybe past a little bit of the Jared Goff stuff.
Fair enough. And it was pretty special when it happened because at that Rams game, man, that stadium was amazing when that thing started and the Rams were on the field. You're like, wow, like they let them know who we were rooting for right away and who the quarterback was of the Detroit Lions.
No question.
All right, well, we are talking the evolution of the Lions, so we have to talk about how this franchise moves forward. Let's talk salary cap a minute. It continues to go up, so that's a good thing,
sure.
Especially because the Lions keep drafting pretty well, pretty darn well. The Lions have been extending guys, and they do that, and they sometimes add some void years. They can spread out the cap hits, but how long can they keep this up? Is there and that's probably an unknown thing that you probably can't answer specifically because there's going to be a lot of variables that come into play. But, J-Mo, Jameer, Laporta, those guys are going to be, J-Mo's got the extension picked up or the option, the fifth-year option.
Yep.
Jameer and Laporta aren't going to be much further behind. And, is there going to be a breaking point for this franchise with some of these players, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the near future, they're going to have to make some difficult decisions. I think, when you're talking about top market guys, you can really, I feel like, only keep about 7, somewhere around that range, like 6, 7, 8, maybe if you're lucky. And the Lions are already kind of butting up against that, right? Like they've drafted so well over these first 4 years that, that first draft class is already all on new contracts that the guys that have stuck around. The second, we've already seen a little bit of the second draft class see that as well. And then, next year is when the third draft class, and there's 4 of those guys in the, the first and second round pick guys, where it's just like, okay, that's already 7, 8, 9, 10 guys where you're just like, I might have to pay these guys top market deals or say goodbye to them. And so that doesn't mean that, the team's going to start sucking, right? Like it just means your job gets a lot harder. It means you have to continue to draft that well because the only way to manage 7 or 8 top market deals is with young drafted talent. And it's going to get a lot harder because you don't have the draft capital you used to. You don't have the, top 10 picks anymore. You got the bottom 10 picks. Right. And so it's just a matter of continuing to kind of like, for lack of a better term, your plate spinning, right? Like as this plate is wobbling, you got to spin it and fix it with a new young talent. And so you're just going to rely a lot on Brad Holmes continuing to do what he's done, just with the difficulty cranked up to all pro at this point. And so we'll see if he can get it done. He's made some big swings in these past couple drafts, and I'm very eager to see how they play out because I think this is why I've been at least a little bit critical of the recent drafts. Is like the pressure's on. The pressure's on for him to knock these out of the park, and so for him to take what I view and it's just my opinion as some risky picks here. You're making a difficult situation maybe even more difficult, but it's hard to he's been doubted before. He's made unconventional picks before that have worked out, and so there's a really good chance he's going to make me look like an idiot in 2 or 3 years too. So I'm very much open to that possibility and hope that I look like an idiot in a couple of years here because the Lions are going to need it.
Because you point that out that might be the most difficult part right now. That might be what keeps this team going is that critical element of how well can Brad Holmes draft, because you're going to have to let some guys go at some point. If they keep playing as well as they are, The good thing is the Lions do have a very deep team. I cannot believe how deep their team is. Their practice squad this year was incredible.
Yeah.
When we started the season. And so let me go to that next part then. There's always that proverbial thing, right? There's the playoff window, right?
Right.
The Super Bowl window. Like, is there a realistic timeline for how long they can stay competitive, or does it close in 3 to 4 years, or can it stay open longer? Because we see some franchises that it stays open for a very long time. Oftentimes the quarterback doesn't change, but
Right.
other elements do.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I think you nailed it right there at the end. Like, as long as Jared Goff's the quarterback of this team, I think the Super Bowl window is open. And I know some people will view that as maybe a little bit of a spicy take because Jared Goff hasn't won a Super Bowl and it's only been to one, but he's proven that he can take a team pretty darn close to the Super Bowl when he doesn't win the Super Bowl. And so, again, it is going to take continually reshuffling the deck from Brad Holmes and continuing to draft well. But I mean, the depth doesn't just disappear overnight. It isn't just about your top end blue chip talent. It's about the depth beyond that. And, the Lions have already started to kind of like undergo some of the transition periods at some positions. Certainly offensive line is one of those. We've seen them draft offensive line after offensive lineman after offensive lineman here in the past 2 or 3 years. And so the transition is already happening. You might already have your left tackle of the future in Giovanni Manu. You probably already have your center of the future in Tate Ratledge. You have a guard of the future in Christian Mahogany. And so that's what it's going to take is that kind of retooling at basically every position. And if you can do that, then your window is going to be open as long as you have a credible quarterback. And the Lions certainly have a credible quarterback. And at some point, you're going to have to renew there too. And we don't know if that's something that Brad Holmes is capable of. He certainly hasn't been great at doing it for the backup spot, which is a little bit less important, but we'll see how Hendon Hooker develops. I'm willing to still believe that he's got a shot to develop into a solid backup. But anyways, I think the overall point is Brad Holmes has said from the beginning that this isn't about winning a Super Bowl. It's about building a consistent long-term franchise. It's about being the Ravens and the Steelers and the Packers in their heyday, that you're always just going to have to be a little bit worried about that team making the playoffs, making a playoff run. And so I think the team is not only started to be built that way, I think it continues to be built that way. And Brad Holmes, the one thing that I can say for certain on Brad Holmes is that he always has the future in mind. And I think he's been drafting that way since the beginning.
Yeah, and making free agent decisions the same way, because it's like the postseason's it's a different season, and like you said, single elimination, anything can happen. And so really your ultimate goal has got to be just get in. If you can get in, then you can play. If you can't get in, you have no shot. And the goal is to stay as competitive as long as possible, so you optimize those number of opportunities.
Absolutely.
So all right. And I guess one question I forgot to ask earlier, which is, the loss of Ben Johnson's being talked about with his play calling and the designing of the offense. But Dan Campbell also helped a little bit with that, did he not?
No question. I mean, that first year after they fired Anthony Lynn, it was Dan Campbell with the play sheet in his hands and calling the plays. And so everything really the offensive has done and will continue to do starts with him. I was talking about this on my own podcast the other day. It's easy to forget that Dan Campbell is kind of the guy that starts the week. He's the guy that when, he's starting to look at the tape of the next day, he's the one that kind of really comes up with the overall game plan. It's then on the coordinators to like develop specific plays and, execute his game plan. But you've heard from multiple players multiple times talk about how Dan Campbell will come in on Wednesday when the work week starts, and he'll say, this is what this team likes to do. This is how we're going to stop them. And then you flash forward to Sunday afternoon, and that's exactly how the game is played out. And so I think he has a really expert way of knowing not only X's and O's, offensive scheme, defensive scheme, but like being able to see how they interact with each other and how to stop one thing from happening by using something else. And you need that at the top, right? That is the offensive genius that everyone is always chasing. Is that like we get obsessed with the play calling and the day-to-day stuff on Sundays in particular, and that stuff absolutely does matter. I was just talking about how that was Ben Johnson's strong suit, but none of that works if you don't have the right game plan coming into the day. And I think Dan Campbell deserves a ton of credit for that. not only in 2021 after Anthony Lynn was gone, but really since as well.
All right. Well, then your logic and thinking is right along with mine, which is I think the Lions are in better shape on offense than people think, even though Ben Johnson's gone because of the Dan Campbell factor.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk welcome back reception then. All right. I actually did not have a dislike for Stafford when he came back, as long as we beat him, which we did.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I'm cool with Stafford, but Ben Johnson chose to go to a division rival. And it's almost like he chose the dark side. I mean, Aaron Glenn, I have no issues with him going to the Jets. But that home opener, week 2, Ford Field, what do you think the reception is going to be like for Ben Johnson?
No, he's going to get booed like crazy. No question. Like I said, I feel like there are some people still blame him for the Washington game. But yeah, I mean, and people are, well, he chose to leave the Monday after the game, like his head wasn't in it. I don't believe any of that stuff,
Right.
but I understand the bad optics of it all, right? Like the as soon as the playoffs are done, he's out the door and he's going to a division rival. You're not going to gain a lot of sympathy from fans doing that. I think a lot of people thought like he was going to do Dan Campbell a favor and be like, oh, there are plenty of opportunities out there. There are better it's not just one good opportunity out there. I don't want to insult Dan Campbell, let me go somewhere else. I also think that's backwards thinking. I think that is like your fandom's leaking in a little bit too much here, because it's on Ben Johnson to take what his belief is the best opportunity.
Yeah.
You don't settle for second best because you don't know if you get a second opportunity ever. So you go where you think it's best. Do I think Chicago was the best option? Not really, but that's what he thought. Chicago means a little bit to him as well, and so I can't fault him for any of that. But you're still going to get booed. You still went to a division rival. Like, I don't know what I think he knows that, right? I think everyone knows that. And it's part of the fun. Stafford knew it when he came back. And so, we'll see. I mean, I don't know if it's going to work out with Chicago or not. I'm a little bit more optimistic than I think a lot of people, because now there's this thing where it's like, oh, well, Ben Johnson's a good coordinator, but he doesn't have the leadership stuff that Dan Campbell has. And I'm just like, well, how do you know that? I mean, I like to think I know him relatively well, and I think he's capable of that. Is that his specialty like it was with Aaron Glenn? No. But we've seen, you don't absolutely. I think we got spoiled with Dan Campbell and thinking like, oh, well, now you have to have like this supreme leader type where that's the only thing that works in the NFL. That's the only thing that seems to have worked here. But you look elsewhere, like, is Sean McVay the best leader type head coach? No, I don't think so. Is Kevin O'Connell? I don't think so. Is Sean? Yeah, I think you can have strengths and weaknesses and still make it work. And so I don't know. I know this isn't what you asked, but I'm just very curious if it's going to work out with Ben Johnson, and I'm a little bit more optimistic for him, which is obviously pessimistic for the Lions, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think my uncle was not so sure that Ben Johnson was going to make it as a head coach either. And I'm like, well, whether you're right or wrong, I would like to not find out with him being in a division rival. I'd rather him go to the Raiders or something like that. And then if he flourishes, great. We play him once every 4 years or something. But yeah, it's just the chance that this could actually maybe finally get Chicago to, right the ship a little bit and then make the NFC North just that much more difficult to play in. So, but yeah, and like you said, I agree. Head coaches are not made from one mold. There's a variety of types that get it done. So it'll see what happens. And in that reception Stafford got, he knew he was getting it, but I don't think in a million years he would have dreamed he'd be going back to Detroit 3 years later in a playoff game. And so that's pretty incredible. And I still maintain that Jared Goff chant is something that Stafford probably wishes he would have gotten, because you were not going to get that in LA ever.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think, and I don't blame Stafford for the decision he made back when he did, because he couldn't have predicted what was coming. And even if he did, I'm not sure if he would have been willing to wait 3 years, because I don't know, this could be his last season now, which would have mean if he'd stayed in Detroit, that would have given him 2-3 bites at the apple before his career was over. Yeah. Versus joining, a team that was ready to win. So I don't blame him for that, but I do think, when he talks about Detroit and he talks about Michigan, he's being legitimate when he talks about how much it matters to him. And, there's a reason why he continues to do some work here, volunteer work here. There's a reason why they talk about it as their second home. And so, yeah, I'm sure in an ideal world, it all would have worked out here, and he would have won a Super Bowl here, and they would have been chanting his name, and he would have been the one to first win a playoff game in that building. But
Yeah.
it didn't, and I don't think that regret is in anybody's mind, right? Like I think
No,
there's a reason why that trade is viewed as one of the most win-win in NFL history.
for sure.
And so for that measure, I don't think anyone needs to feel salty or spurned or anything like that. It worked out pretty darn well for everybody.
It did. And I mean, look what it did for Jared Goff's career. I mean,
Yeah.
it for everybody, it worked out great.
Yep.
Well, as we talked about, there's multiple variables going into the 2025 season. More player personnel changes, coaching changes, schedules tougher. So what does a successful 2025 NFL season look like for the Detroit Lions to you?
It's a great question because there's not really much up to go in terms of the regular season. I think it just starts with making the playoffs. Like I think we've gotten to a point where like winning the division is nice. It's going to be a lot more difficult this year, but it's not really necessary. There's no monkey to get off your back there when it comes to winning a division or winning back-to-back divisions at this point. And so I think you just Super Bowl or bust feels a little bit too high of a bar necessarily, but I think you have to get to the NFC Championship game at a minimum for this to be considered a successful season. There's definitely going to be some frustration if they don't reach the Super Bowl, no matter what. But I think now that you've taken maybe a step back, if you want to call it that, from the NFC Championship game to the divisional round. I think getting back to the NFC Championship game is really the only way you're going to convince people this was a step forward. And even then, like I said, there are going to be some people like, well, this team has had a team capable of winning the Super Bowl for 3 years now, and they haven't even gotten to a Super Bowl. So what's wrong? I hope I don't get to that level of spoiled, and but that's the danger, or I guess the downside of raising expectations, is that you at some point it's not going to be enough to win a playoff game. It's not going to be enough to get to the NFC Championship. It's not going to, and at some point it's not going to be enough to get to the Super Bowl. Like you got to go out there and actually win it. And so I think that is where the bar has been set at this point. Anything less than the NFC Championship game, I think, is going to be viewed as a failure. Anything short of the Super Bowl is going to be viewed as a disappointment.
Yeah, well, that's where we are, right? The franchise has evolved to a spot where now, you want to say Super Bowl or bust, but two teams make it to the Super Bowl every year out of all of them. And so like you said, it's almost unrealistic to say you need to make it to the Super Bowl. Getting to the playoffs, I think, is probably the first goal, like you said. And whether it is winning the division or not, getting in the playoffs is what matters. So that way you have a shot to get to the Super Bowl. But then how many years can you make the playoffs and not go to the Super Bowl and feel okay with it? I mean, a lot of franchises are in that mode. A lot of them have been there. And the Lions, for many years, Lions fans have been like, well, at least it'd be nice to be at least as good as this team. At least they go to the playoffs every couple of years.
Right.
But now that we're there, we want to stick around and maybe go a little further. I mean, definitely go a little further. So, all right. So you're saying NFC Championship game is what you're kind of holding it to? Like that's kind of what makes it successful?
Yeah, I mean, people are not going to be happy. Like I said, it's still going to be viewed, I think, publicly as a disappointment if they don't get to the Super Bowl. But to me, if you want to feel like there's still an upward trajectory, I think the NFC Championship game has to be the goal there.
All right. And again, there's so many variables that play in throughout a season that what you and I are talking about right now, we can fully believe what we're saying right now, but something could happen in the season that changes everything. I mean, all those injuries on defense last year, you could not have predicted those. And so that has to change your calculus. You want them to still do well in the postseason, but knowing that they're down so many players, you can't help but say, well, the variables changed.
Yep. Yeah. And it's a long season. Teams are going to look a lot different than we think they look right now too. It's not even just injuries. It's like, okay, they have one of the hardest schedules in football. Well, what if some of these teams aren't as good as we think they are? What if some teams are even better than we thought they were?
Right.
Everything's going to look different in a matter of 2 months here. And so you're right, that our expectations shouldn't stay static from where they are right now, because the circumstances are almost certainly going to change in some way or another.
That makes total sense. Yeah, every year you see that, right? Oh, we have the toughest schedule. Then suddenly it becomes, oh, really? It's not that bad because these three teams kind of fell off this year. And so those changes do happen. So, All right, we didn't see a letdown, last year or the year before. The Lions have continued to grow. Obviously, the win number can't continue to grow. You can't win 3 more games in the regular season because you only lost 2 last year. So that's not mathematically possible. Schedule's different. Everything's different. It's not just winning more games that continues to make them competitive and a fun team to watch. But you believe that they're at a spot now that as long as they've got Dan Campbell and Jared Goff, they can stay competitive and they've got a shot at the playoffs every year?
Yeah, no question. I mean, this year, I still think they have a top 3 roster in the NFL. Obviously, there are serious questions to have along the offensive line, and that is the one spot where this team doesn't want to have questions. So that is something that could make them take a step back this year. It certainly is possible, but I just think the bar still is, or the floor is just so high still because they have 4 or 5 game-changing players on both sides of the ball that as long as, you don't lose 6 of them total, like they're going to be a really, really good football team. They don't, you don't just go from 8 Pro Bowl players to suddenly you're a 5-12 football team when you don't really lose any of those players or you lose one to retirement. So yeah, I think they're set up, and the best part of it all is that so many of these guys that are elite are young. They're 26 and under. Your Penei Sewells, your Jahmyr Gibbs, your Amon-Ra St. Browns, those is Kirby Joseph, right? Like all these guys are not only in the prime of their career, but they still have like 5 or 6 years in the prime of their career. And so I think the Lions are here to stay for at least the next 5 or 6 years. It's just a matter of if they can get over that hump.
All right, last question for you. Which teams in the NFC are the biggest threat to the Lions? Which ones are the ones that are going to be the biggest competition this year, you think?
It's a good question because I think there can be a handful of them, and you start probably in the division there, and I still think the Green Bay Packers are the biggest challenge in the division. I know they finished third behind the Vikings, but with the Vikings starting JJ McCarthy, it's hard for me to just assume that they're going to be really, really good. I have a lot of respect for that coaching staff, and I think they're going to get the most they can possibly get out of a quote unquote quote rookie quarterback. But I think the Packers are still the team to keep at bay, I guess you should say, since the Lions are the winners in the division. But obviously Washington is a team that's up and coming. Another, I think, well-coached team. And you have a very dangerous young quarterback that can lift all boats when you have a guy like that. Beyond that, I think, obviously, the Eagles, I mean, right. I don't need to justify that pick, right? Yeah. But I would look out for the Rams this year. I think that is a team that has been sneakily. I mean, we expect there to be some sort of drop off, right? They trade all these draft picks. They win all in the whole F them picks, but like they've actually drafted really, really well over the last 3 years, and they've somehow prevented that that 1 or 2 years where it's like, oh, they got to reload. And I think they're right back in it. I think the way they finished last year was really, really strong. They took the Eagles to the brink in the playoffs. They were really the only team to give the Eagles any sort of trouble. And if they pick up from where they left off, I think they're as good as any other NFC team. And so, honestly, my top 3 are probably Lions, Eagles, and Rams.
You said Lions. Oh, top 3 teams in the NFC, not top 3 threats to the Lions. Yeah. Okay. I got you.
If you want to do threats in there, throw Washington in there.
Sure. No, yeah, I think you're spot on with the Rams too. That Stafford's team there with the way they've drafted, he's still playing very well. That is a well-coached team as well. So, awesome, Jeremy. Thank you for joining the show. Is there anything I didn't ask you'd like to talk about or mention about the Lions?
I don't think so. I'm ready to get things going here. We're on the verge of training camp, or at least it feels like it's still a couple weeks away. But I'm almost in training camp mode because like now we're kind of ramping up the coverage here, the pre-training camp coverage, and then we're gonna get into training camp, and I'm just ready to go, man.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm pretty darn excited myself. Again, folks, reminder, you can find Jeremy Reisman and his work at prideofdetroit.com. Check out his podcast, the POD cast. If you aren't already doing that, you really should. And then remind the listeners again about the Subscriber Direct.
Yeah, it's called Pride of Detroit Direct. Again, we drop like 3 or 4 editions per week, especially during the seasons. It's at the top end of that. It's, post-game shows from Ford Field, it's mailbags at the end of the month. It's kind of like from the gut feelings. We get guest writers. So Ty Shelter has been writing for us for about a year, and I think he's the cream of the crop of Lions writers. He's just a very, very talented writer and a very smart guy. So you get a piece from him every single week, and all you got to do, go to pridedetroit.com/subscribe. It's $50 for a year, an annual subscription. And with, Netflix is basically charging that a month at this point. So I think it's very much worth your time, and it's a way to support journalism in a way that if you're sick of all the AI stuff, you're sick of all the clickbait stuff. This is how you support good integrity writing. So pridedetroit.com/subscribe.
All right. And it comes right to your email inbox, folks. You can just go right there and read it. You don't have to go looking for it. And it is quality content. Jeremy, thank you so much. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. You can find more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit that like button. And while you're at it, tell your friends about the show. Please subscribe regardless of your listening platform. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.